I'm quite happy to get to introduce Emily Hancock now from Cloudflare for her presentation on building privacy into the internet, because bringing those two together isn't always that easy. So yeah, Emily, it's great to have you here today. I'm giving the floor to you.
Good morning, I'm Emily Hancock. I head up the legal team for product privacy and IP at Cloudflare, and I'm also the data protection officer. Now, you all know in recent years, privacy on the internet has taken on an increasingly important role. And last year's Shrum II decision brought into stark relief concerns about government surveillance and cross-border data transfer in the EU and globally. There are a number of ways to address these privacy and cross-border data transfer concerns. One is to pass laws that regulate what data processors can do with people's data, and to mandate that processors meet certain requirements, like notice and consent, before they do anything with that personal data. There will always be a need for regulation around people's data, but rather than passing more and more laws or issuing more prescriptive regulations to contain massive data ocean that is the internet, what if we shrunk the ocean? What if there is simply less personal data available? Today, I want to talk about ways that Cloudflare and others have invested in privacy-focused technologies to shrink the amount of personal data that is exposed for tracking, profiling, or surveilling. This is the third phase of the internet, the privacy phase. Now, before I talk about the privacy phase, tell me, how many of us are old enough to remember that screechy sound of a modem connecting your computer to the internet? Back in those days, and really through the 1990s, the internet was all about making connections and having connectivity. Connectivity meant that people could get online and use the internet wherever they were through a variety of technologies, from dial-up modems using phone lines to cable modems and Ethernet cables, and later fiber optic connections and Wi-Fi. In this first phase of the internet, the connectivity phase, the focus was on connecting people to the online world faster and more reliably. We went from having one internet-connected computer in a school or library to building out cyber cafes and computer labs so people could connect more easily. By the 1990s, the internet was being used widely and for uses far beyond the academic origins. E-commerce started taking off, and early web pioneers like Netscape realized the potential for e-commerce was gigantic, but it could be held back if people didn't have confidence in the security of online transactions. I remember the first several times I bought something online, I was so worried my credit card number would be stolen or the item I bought wouldn't show up, because how could I trust the retailer on the other side of the transaction to fulfill it? As e-commerce grew, security concerns grew, and we saw laws focusing on notifying individuals if they had security breaches resulting in unauthorized access to personal information. Then, with the introduction of SSL in 1994, the internet moved into its second phase, the security phase. Securing the web and the internet more generally helped create the dot-com rush and the secure online internet we live in today. I know when I started seeing that little lock symbol on web pages, I felt better about entering my credit card number. But I also understood very little about what was actually happening to my information as it traveled over the internet connection. Who received my information? What were they doing with it? Was someone watching me and watching what I was doing online, paying attention to my shopping habits? A lot of us rushed headlong into creating MySpace pages or Friendster profiles without even thinking about what might happen to our information. We worried about bad actors hacking into our accounts and stealing our information, but most of us weren't thinking that an advertiser might be just as interested in our social media posts as our friends were, albeit for very different reasons. Often, security measures on the internet were misunderstood as providing guarantees about privacy, which they did not. So the connectivity phase of the internet made it possible for you to connect to a computer anywhere in the world just as easily as one in your own city. And then the security phase of the internet solved the problem of giving you the confidence to hand over information to a retailer. Combining these two phases resulted in an internet you can trust to transmit your data, but that gives you little control over where your data ultimately ends up. And for a lot of people, that wasn't good enough. A number of countries and the EU saw these concerns coming and passed early privacy laws aimed at making sure internet sites were giving people notice about data collection and use. But few consumers really read or understood these notices, and many didn't understand the technologies that were starting to track them as they went from site to site online. So during the security phase of the internet, people felt safe going online to shop, read the news, look up ailments, search for a life partner. because cryptography prevents an eavesdropper from seeing what they're doing, and it provides a guarantee that a website is what it claims to be. But it doesn't provide the privacy guarantees because the website you're visiting knows, at the very least, the IP address of your internet connection. And even with encryption, a well-placed eavesdropper can learn at least the names of the websites you're visiting because of information leaks from protocols that weren't designed to preserve privacy. But unless you know how to remain anonymous using technologies like Tor or a VPN, people didn't think about how to keep their identity private, or they didn't know about those technologies that would enable that privacy. On the other hand, remaining anonymous from a website you shop from or an airline's online booking site doesn't make any sense, because in those instances, the company you're dealing with will know who you are because you tell them. You want them and need them to know. And that makes privacy a very nuanced thing. You want to remain anonymous to an eavesdropper, but you want to make sure the retailer knows where you live so they can deliver a package. You want to be able to access advertising-supported websites, but you don't want the advertisers to know everything about your shopping habits. And you want to use location-enabled services, but you don't want your locations to be tracked over time. In addition, the economics and flexibility of SaaS and cloud applications meant that it made sense to actually transfer data to a limited number of large data centers where people from all over the world can be processed, where data from people all over the world can be processed. And by and large, that was the world of the internet: universal connectivity, widespread security, and data sharing through cross-border agreements. Now, this apparent utopia got snowed on by the leaking of secret documents describing the relationship between the US NSA and its Five Eyes partners and large internet companies, and that intelligence agencies were scooping up data from choke points on the internet. Those revelations brought to the public's attention the fact that their data could, in some cases, be accessed by foreign intelligence agencies. So quite quickly, those large data centers in far-flung countries looked like a bad idea, and governments and citizens started to demand control of the data. This is the third phase of the internet. Privacy joins universal connectivity and security as core. Now, many countries responded to these privacy concerns by introducing data protection legislation designed to offer people more privacy and more control of their data. But what does it even mean to have control over your data or privacy? Different governments have different ideas and different requirements, which can be different for different data sets. It's a lot of differences. Some countries are convinced that the only way to control data is to keep it inside their countries, where they believe they can control who gets access to it. Other countries believe that they can address the risks by putting in place restrictions to prevent certain governments or companies from getting access to the data, and the regulatory challenges are only getting more complicated. This will be an enormous challenge for companies that have built a business on aggregating citizens' information in order to target advertising, but it's also a challenge for anyone offering an internet service. Just as companies have had to face the scourge of DDoS attacks and hacking and have had to stay up to date with the latest in encryption technology, they will fundamentally have to store and process their customers' data in different countries in different ways. The European Union in particular has pushed a comprehensive approach to data privacy. Although the EU has had data protection principles in place since 1995, the implementation of the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, in 2018 generated a new era of privacy online. GDPR imposes limitations on how the personal data of EU residents can be collected, stored, deleted, modified, and otherwise processed. And with the Schrems II decision in July 2020, companies are grappling with how they can transfer data outside the EU, consistent with GDPR requirements. The EU Data Protection Board's guidance that data exporters assess laws in third countries to determine whether that law adequately protects privacy and, if necessary, obtain guarantees of additional safeguards from data importers have only added to companies' concerns. And this anxiety, whether there are controls over data that are adequate to address the concerns of European regulators, has prompted many of our customers to explore whether it is possible to prevent data subject to the GDPR from leaving the EU at all. Now, one reaction to these changes could be a retreat into every country building its own online email services, HR services, e-commerce providers, and more. This would be a massive wasted effort. There are economies of scale of the same service can be used by Germans, Peruvians, Indonesians, and Australians. So we think the answer to this privacy challenge is the same as the answer to the connectivity and security phases of the internet. We build it. We need to build a privacy-respected internet and give companies the tools to easily build privacy-respected applications. At Cloudflare, we believe in empowering individuals and entities of all sizes with technological tools to reduce the amount of personal data that gets funneled into the data ocean, regardless of whether someone lives in a country with laws protecting the privacy of their personal data. If we can build tools to help individuals share less personal data online, then that's a win for privacy no matter what your country of residence. Now, there's a lot of examples of how privacy can be built into the internet and in ways that allow companies to still make money, just not at the expense of individuals' privacy. Let's think about search engines. Many search engines compile profiles using someone's personal information, like search, browsing, and purchase history. And then advertisers pay a premium to get their ads in front of those target audiences. But in recent years, companies like DuckDuckGo have started to gain traction. DuckDuckGo doesn't profile its users or collect personal information. It's ad supported, but ads on DuckDuckGo are based on the search results page someone's viewing, not that individual's personal information. Now, beyond search engines, there's a number of other tools that have been launched to build privacy into web browsing. Nonprofit organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation have arguably been instrumental in improving client-side privacy by releasing features and extensions that are now baked into browsers by default. One notable example is EFF's HTTPS Everywhere, which encrypts your communications with many websites to secure your browsing experience. Or there's EFF's Privacy Badger, which you can install in your browser to stop advertisers and trackers from secretly tracking where you go and what pages you look at on the web. But making internet browsing safer with pro-privacy technologies isn't just for nonprofits. Let's talk about DNS records for a second. DNS records are like the addresses on the outside of an envelope, and the web content you're viewing is like the letter inside that envelope. Now, in the snail mail world, courts have long recognized that the address on the outside of a letter doesn't deserve as much privacy protection as the letter itself. But we're not living in an age where the only thing someone can tell from the outside of an envelope are the to and from addresses and place of postage. The digital envelopes of DNS requests contain much more information about a person than you might expect. Not only is there information about the sender and recipient addresses, but there's specific timestamp information about when the requests are submitted, the domains and the subdomains visited, and even how long someone stayed at a certain site. Since these digital envelopes contain so much personal information, we think it's just as important to encrypt this information as to encrypt the contents of the digital letter inside. And that's why we doubled down on DNS over HTTPS, or DOE. But we at Cloudflare thought we could go further. So last year, we announced our support for Oblivious DOE, or ODO. ODO is a proposed DNS standard co-authored by engineers from Cloudflare, Apple, and Fastly that separates IP addresses from queries, so no single entity can see both at the same time. ODO requires a proxy as a key part of the communication path between client and resolver, with encryption ensuring that the proxy doesn't know the contents of the DNS query, only where to send it, and the resolver only knows what the query is, but not who originally requested it. They only know the proxy's IP address. That means the identity of the requester and the content of the request are unlinkable. Now, Apple has made this kind of thing this kind of privacy competitive advantage when they recently launched Apple Private Relay, which is built on the ODO standard. Apple's Private Relay service makes it so your DNS records and your IP address are kept private from your ISP and from the sites you're browsing online. Now, Cloudflare has taken similar steps to allow for pro-privacy browsing. In 2018, Cloudflare launched the 1.1.1.1 public DNS resolver, the internet's fastest privacy-first public DNS resolver. Now, our public resolver doesn't retain any personal data about web requests. And because we baked anonymization best practices into the 1.1 resolver when we built it, we were able to demonstrate that we didn't have any personal data to sell when we asked independent accountants to conduct a privacy examination of the 1.1 resolver. And when you combine our privacy, our 1.1 public resolver with Warp, our VPN, then your internet service provider can no longer see every site or app you use, even if they're encrypted, which means that even if they wanted to, the ISP can't sell your data or use it to target you with ads. We've also built pro-privacy tools our customers can use. For example, late last year, we launched a privacy-first free web analytics tool. Popular analytics vendors glean visitors and site data in return for web analytics. With business models driven by ad revenue, many analytics vendors track visitor behavior on websites and create buyer profiles to retarget website visitors with ads. But we wanted to give our customers a better option, so they wouldn't have to sacrifice their visitors' privacy to get essential and accurate metrics on website usage. Cloudflare Web Analytics works by adding a JavaScript snippet to a website instead of using a client-side cookie, or instead of fingerprinting individuals using their IP addresses. There's also even ways to build privacy into technologies that perform sensitive tasks. One of Cloudflare's core services is our web application firewall, which blocks more than 72 billion malicious requests each day from reaching our customers' applications. Now, this alone is privacy preserving because it helps our customers prevent attackers from extracting sensitive data by blocking malicious traffic before it can get the information. Typically, our customers can easily confirm these requests were not legitimate by checking the URL, the query parameters, or other metadata that we provide as part of our security event log at a customer's dashboard. But sometimes investigating a WAF event requires a bit more research and a trial and error approach, because the WAF may have matched against a field that is not logged by default, for example. And not logging all parts of a request is intentional. HTTP headers and payloads often contain sensitive data, including personally identifiable information, which we consider a toxic asset. Request headers may contain cookies, and post payloads may contain username and password pairs submitted during a login attempt, among other sensitive data. On the other hand, providing clear visibility in any security event is a core feature of a firewall, because this allows users to better fine-tune their rules. So how do we balance these competing privacy concerns? We built encrypted WAF-matched payload logging. This feature will log only the specific component of the request the WAF has deemed malicious, and it's encrypted using a customer-provided key. So all Cloudflare logs are encrypted at rest, and this feature implements a second layer of encryption for the specific matched fields so that only the customer can decrypt it. No Cloudflare employee can examine the data. For this feature, we use an exciting new standard developed in part by Cloudflare called hybrid public key encryption. Search engines that don't profile users as they browse the internet, analytics that don't track personally identifiable information, firewall logs that encrypt payloads so the firewall provider can't see the data, and technologies that prevent ISPs from watching and monetizing where specific people are going on the internet. These are only a few examples of ways that privacy is being built into the internet now, these days. But there's so many more innovations out there challenging the norms we've all become accustomed to in the internet's first two phases of connectivity and security. I don't know about you, but I'm very excited to see what the future holds for the privacy phase of the internet. Privacy enhancing technologies will never completely drain the ocean of data on the internet. But if the data traversing the internet is encrypted or anonymized to minimize privacy risks, then maybe someday the jurisdiction of where the data is from or where it's traveling through and to won't really matter, because it won't be personal data. It'll just be encrypted, meaningless noise traveling between me and my bank or accountant or doctor. And you won't actually know that it was from me to my doctor, because there will be a break between those 2 points and you can't associate that traffic. I look forward to when that becomes the norm. Thank you for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your Bitkom sessions.